We welcome back to Houston Sports Talk, our Rockets insider, the Chronicle's Jenny Dial Creech. Thanks for joining us, Jenny. The wait is finally over. The playoffs are here. The Rockets starting this thing Saturday. Beverly and Howard look like they'll be ready to go, and that leads me to my first question. Have you gotten some sort of gauge on how they look? Are they anywhere near 100% in reality right now?
I think both of them played pretty well in the last game, actually. Dwight Howard's stats don't necessarily show that, but they kind of needed him in a different role against New Orleans, and more of a defensive role, so it doesn't really show up on the stat sheet. He said he was a little tired, but that's why they're, back and getting game time under their belt before the playoffs start, so that they will have that conditioning and rhythm back before they get into a playoff situation. Same thing with Beverly. I feel like in his first game back against New Orleans, same one Dwight came back on, he got his rhythm a little bit later in the second half, but once he got it, he looked great. I thought he defended well, was very physical out there, was going after every loose ball. And I really think the Rockets were missing that even more than Howard in the stretch that that the two of them were out. They were able to fill some holes with Ashik. It wasn't quite the same as having Dwight out there, but it worked. But there really wasn't an answer for what Beverly could do. So I think it's huge for them to have both of those guys back. Now the question will just be them getting Chandler healthy, who suffered a little bit of an injury against Minnesota.
I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I think you're saying Asik, good defensively, Lynn, bad defensively. But I want to ask you about Kelvin Sampson leaving. Do you think that's really affected their defense? How concerned should we be over the last couple of weeks, aside from just not having Beverly and Howard in the starting lineup, about the defense?
I don't think you're going to see a drop-off. I just think this is a Rockets team that, we've talked about this before, certain players have their different strengths, and their best defender on the floor might be Dwight, but it might be Beverly. And it's just his style. It's not necessarily that he's such a good defender. He's just a very physical player. And there's not a lot of guys who do that anymore, just across the board in the league. He really throws his body into people, and he gets so intense out there. And I think that's something that the Rockets don't really get from a lot of their other guys. Beverly doesn't have the finesse of some of the other players, and he can't attack the basket like some of the other guys on offense, but I do think he brings just a certain level of energy that really kind of ups the whole team's defense. And I think when you kind of look, especially at this point in the season, when you look at a team overall, every guy has to be there doing their thing. So like I said, that's why it's important they get Chandler back too. I think Lynn's role off the bench is extremely important. I think he brings a lot to the table in that role. I'm happy to see what Demo has been doing lately. I think he can bring something in, but everyone kind of needs to be in their role and in their rhythm if they really wanted to make a playoff run.
We know about 8 of the 9 guys in the rotation in the playoffs. The last question, I guess, is who's going to be the backup at the 3 spot. Do you have any clue as to what Mikhail's going to do? Is it going to be Garcia, Caspi, or Hamilton?
I'm curious about the same thing. I would think that Garcia is sort of the front runner in that position. But again, he hurt his back the other day against Minnesota, so we'll have to see how he's feeling. But him healthy, obviously, I think he, out of the 3, is the best defender. So I could see them kind of rolling him into that spot. Caspi, I at the beginning of the year, if you would have asked me this question, I would have thought it would be no doubt Caspi, but he really hasn't been playing that well lately. So, that certainly can be a problem at this point in the season. And then, but the other night with Garcia and Chandler out, Caspi got the start. So, obviously he's an option. And then I honestly, I'm curious what's going on with Jordan Hamilton, right? When he got with the Rockets, he got, a lot of good minutes of playing time, but we really haven't seen much of him lately. And if you look at that New Orleans game, you look at the, last quarter of it, the rookie Troy Daniels, who had played earlier that day, got the minutes over Hamilton. So I don't know what's going on there, if Mikhail is just trying things out or what the deal is, but Out of those three, I would certainly say Garcia seems to be his top choice.
Yeah, I liked Hamilton when I saw him when he came over from the Nuggets. I mean, he does play defensively, had played well in spurts, and then also was able to hit the three-pointer. So I'm kind of perplexed too, like you're saying, why hasn't he gotten more time?
Right. It's been kind of strange because he, when they brought him over, it seemed like they really wanted to work him into that rotation. In those first few games, they did, and he played pretty well. But now we just haven't seen much of him lately. We saw he played a lot in that Denver game when Mikal played like all rookies and Hamilton basically in that fourth quarter. And I thought Hamilton played really well in that situation too. I thought all those guys did. So I'm not really sure. I'm definitely curious to see how that goes. But that's, when you've had a guy like Chandler who's played he's played the most minutes of anyone when he's in the game. There's, overall, I think Harden has a few more, but if you go strictly by average in the games that they've been in, Chandler, I mean, he just plays so many minutes. So they haven't had to do a lot of thinking at that position because Chandler gives you so much. But certainly in the playoffs, it's going to be a big question.
Yeah, if I had one quibble with Mikal, it's been his kind of strange rotations and which guys he's playing in and out. We know we're going to play Portland. I want to just ask you what the keys do you think are going to be to that series? LaMarcus Aldridge, defending him is always a big deal, but obviously the three-point shot with Portland and how you defend that, I think has got to be the major thing the Rockets are concerned about.
Yeah, I think that, and really just, I mean, you guys know from all the years of playoffs that teams that have momentum going into the playoffs are scary, and I think Portland might be one of those teams, particularly after their big win over Golden State. I mean, that was just fantastic basketball to watch. It felt like the playoffs, and Portland's, they're playing the way that they were early in the season. They had a little bit of a drop off kind of in the middle and then sort of came back up, and I just think they're playing really well right now. So the biggest thing I think the Rockets are going to have to get under control is just getting their rhythm back in these last few games, some of it because of injury and changing out those rotations. They're just off. They're having slow starts. They're not passing the ball as well. They're not playing good in transition. All the things that they do well, it's taken them 2 quarters to start doing those things well, and then they're having to come back in these games. So I think for them, the biggest thing is not necessarily about what Portland's going to do, but the Rockets have got to make sure that they're clicking on all cylinders again. The starting five need to be healthy and playing well together. The backups need to be coming in and providing, ample amounts of energy. And if they can get all of those things working together, we have a great playoff series on our hands.
Well, maybe they get that intensity too at the very beginning of the matchup there because Beverly going up against Lillard, they had Lillard had those words for Beverly after the last matchup with Portland. So maybe that tone setting at the beginning, and we know how emotional Beverly can be as well.
Right, exactly.
The energy and intensity in that first quarter, because that usually sets the tone in playoff games too.
Well, and that's when they've been at their best, when they've come out and started well. At the beginning of the season, we saw them have all these slow starts, and then once they got over that hump, started coming out, hitting first, taking a lead, and forcing the other team to come back. That's when they're at their best. Once they get rolling, the Rockets are a very hard team to stop. And then we've seen them revert back into early season form lately where they're not coming out with that intensity and they're not, they just look a little flat. And like I said, some of that really has been the fact that you've had these injuries and switching in and out of players and trying to figure out these rotations. So the biggest thing for them is in these next 2 games, I think they really need to work on being a little bit better together so that when the playoffs start or, in the next however long they have to practice, whatever, work on those things, work on your chemistry and your lineups and being together and what everyone's role is. And I think if they can get back to that sort of mid-season form, where they were January, February, when we started seeing them come out with those big starts and big leads, then they're going to be okay. If they can't get that back, they're, if Portland's not a team you can let take a big lead on you and then try to come back, because they just shoot the ball too well for you to come back.
Well, the one guy that's had momentum and consistency over the last few games has been James Harden, 30 points and 10 assists in 4 of his last 5. I also saw that his numbers this year against Portland pretty strong, averaging 30 a game. If you look at his last 2 playoff series, Harden struggled against Miami 2 years ago in the finals and then against the Thunders last year. I think this is perfect for him, Jenny, to start off with Portland. It's a team that he's had some success in, and I think it's a good matchup for him to get back on track in the playoffs.
Well, yeah, and like you said, I think Harden's playing his best basketball of the year right now, and you can look back and find some highlight games before, but the consistency level that he's at right now is very high. There've been a lot of games where Harden had 38 points, but he maybe shot 25% to get that, and those numbers are better. It's just more consistent. He's making more shots. He's attacking better. And frankly, the Rockets have needed him. I mean, especially if you look at the last couple of road games that the Rockets, picked up these kind of miracle wins at the end of those games, it's been because of Harden getting them back into it. And, it's a good thing he's doing what he's doing. He does match up well with Portland. I think that'll be a good series for him. But I also think, at right now, I don't know that it would matter who he's playing against, because he's really on a roll, and it's the right time for him to be on one. But the Rockets have got to figure out a way to put something else around him where he doesn't have to be this late game hero in every situation.
Jenny, we can talk about James Harden, but you know as well as I do that when the national television broadcasters from ESPN and TNT, ABC start covering the Rockets, there'll be the talk about how far a Dwight Howard team can go in the playoffs. When every possession counts, will he be able to make key free throws? When the game slows down and the half-court offense becomes important, will he deliver in the post or will he disappear? Will he have that killer instinct to make a championship run? What do you think?
I think that this year in general for Dwight Howard, that he's played incredibly well. And I think the thing about him too is there really aren't a lot of centers in this league that can outdo Howard. And so I think he's one of the better, at his position for the Rockets, he's one of the better one-on-one guys. The other thing that I think is really overlooked about Howard this year is how well he's passing out of the paint. And how they can actually run an offense through him being down low. And I think a lot of people fail to look at that part of his game because it's never really had to be a big part of his game. So I think that he's, again, I think he's a guy that's playing some of his best basketball this season. He's healthy. He's in a good place, personally. So I think that he's going to have some big playoff games. And the other thing about, again, with this Rockets team, Harden, Howard, Beverly, Lynn, any of those guys that you want to point to, for whatever it is they do, it doesn't work unless they're all doing those things. So, I mean, can any one of them win a game by himself? Maybe Harden, but late in a game, they're all going to have to put things together, or it's just not going to work.
Yeah, speaking of, like you just mentioned there, that one who has to show up there is Jeremy Lin and be part of all of them playing well at the end of games in order for the Rockets to win. But he's just been so streaky and inconsistent that it's kind of hard to fathom even at this point. Is he going to put it all together in the playoffs and have consistent series and consistent games? So he offers that offensive punch off the bench. He can even, go get steals, and he plays well with Beverly, as you've noted earlier in columns you've written. So how do you expect him to fare in the playoffs?
His streakiness has not been in the fourth quarters of games, hasn't been at the end of games. I think if you kind of look over the last, however many games, and you look in the, at the end, in games that he's been in, that's where he's actually playing well. He seems to have a switch that turns on late in the game. That's where he's hitting those big three. If he's 2 of 7, generally the 2 are late in the game when the Rockets have needed him. He's really good at hitting free throws down the stretch, and he's had a couple of really big steals late. he's got to figure out how to do that early in the game. To be quite frank, he's just not coming out with much lately. But I truly believe that that's because they got him in this, backup role and then threw him back into a starting position and it just didn't work well. So I think that he's going to be better now that he's coming in off the bench. And I really like the way he's been playing late in games. But, it's the problem with that is sometimes he's not in the game late because he hasn't been good early. But when he has been in late in these last several games, he's done really well. So, it'll be interesting. He has kind of been on a roller coaster this year. I think a lot of that's him. I think a lot of that's the Rockets kind of changing his role back and forth all year. That's a lot on a young guy.
Is he the guy that you look at as maybe could be the difference maker in the series? Like how he goes, the Rockets will go. Is it Terrence Jones? Is it Chandler Parsons? Who do you think could be that guy that he's got it going? They can win these games.
I don't think there's one guy. I think Howard and Harden are gonna get what they're gonna get every night, and I think that can be very high with Harden. But I think in every other game in the playoffs, you're going to have a different guy step up. And, Terrence Jones is going to have some big games. And, Chandler, he's another guy. Like, he's going to be consistent no matter what. I don't know that you're going to get a 40-point game out of Chandler, but you're always going to get a pretty solid effort, and he's going to defend one of the better players on the other team well. But I think Lynn, Jones, Beverly, someone like Garcia coming off the bench, one of those guys in every game is going to have to give something. And if you look across the board in playoffs, there's guys like that every year, and I think the Rockets are really going to need everyone to have big games, and then someone else is going to have to be able to do it the next night, because this is where, you're going to play the same team over and over. So Jeremy Lin gets out there, has a huge night. They're going to key in on him the next night. That's when you need Terrence Jones to step up. It's just going to have to be one of those situations where but you're going to have the consistent Howard Harden, the Howard double-double and lately the Harden double-double. And then someone else is going to have to step up each night. But I don't think that there's one guy that you can pin that on. I think it's going to it's going to fluctuate.
Well, the $1 million question is, what do you got? Who do you got? And how many games in this series?
I think the Rockets will get out of the first round. I know things are different when you get to the playoffs, but I like the way that they match up with Portland. I like the way they played against Portland this year. And I, personally, just from the basketball standpoint, I really, really like that Portland team. I could watch them all day. I love that style of play. But I think the Rockets have the edge here. Beverly has done such a good job on Lillard, but I think Lillard's a big X factor for them. If he brings a lot to the table, that could be a problem. But I think the Rockets get out, probably 6 games. And then the second round brings a whole nother set of challenges.
Looking at the overall playoff picture, Jenny, it doesn't seem as automatic anymore to any of us that we'll have that Indiana-Miami Eastern Conference Finals. How are you looking at the East with the playoffs starting up? And are you expecting the Clippers, Spurs, and Thunder in the West to all advance to the second round? Or is there a dangerous team in the bottom half of the playoff picture in the West you think could bump off one of these favorites?
Well, shoot, after watching that Portland Golden State game, I wouldn't be counting out the Warriors right now. They're playing really good basketball. So, the West is totally up in the air. I'd be really surprised if San Antonio and Oklahoma didn't make it past the first round. But like I said, Golden State, that one could be really interesting. In the East, Indiana, that's a tough one. Like if you would have asked me a few months ago, I wouldn't have. I might have had my doubts about Miami, but not about Indiana. And now that's pretty much flipped. But at the end of the day, the problem with the East is going to be that they're, whoever gets in to the finals could be rested, and whoever gets in from the West could be really beat up. So I don't even think the East holds a candle to the West this year even at the top. So
Do you think there's a surprise team maybe in the East that could, get to the Eastern Conference Finals now that it's not really on it? I mean, Brooklyn maybe or some.
Yeah, Brooklyn's playing its best basketball right now. They finally got their stuff together. I think Atlanta's been playing pretty good lately, and I think they're a team that people tend to overlook. They're really good defensively, and that can come into play in the playoffs a lot. Defense matters a lot more in the playoffs, I think, than it does at any other time in the season because, again, you're playing the same team X number of times, and shooting is on and off, but if your defense is good and consistent, that can take you a long way. So Atlanta would be another team over there that I'd look at with I could see them making a nice run too. You never know.
Yeah, it doesn't seem as obvious as it did at the beginning of the season, that's for sure. Or at least even halfway through the season.
But that makes it a little bit more interesting. Hey, that's a reason to watch the playoffs, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there'll be a lot of good long playoff series, which is great for anyone who likes the sport. The longer that we can drag it out, the better.
Well, Jenny was nice enough to stop and talk to us in the rain in her car, and it's just always great to have her on the show. Jenny, thanks for coming on with us again.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Jenny.
Have fun in the playoffs.
Thanks for having me on, guys. We'll talk again soon.
Yeah, definitely. That's Houston Chronicles' Jenny Dial Creech. You can read her stuff on chron.com, of course, and check her out at Jenny Dial Creech on Twitter.